Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for a stream this week featuring both of us as I've returned from my 2-week trip to Japan and South Korea. Happy to be back and talking Star Wars with all of you. So, hopefully, you guys are going to join us for tonight's stream again, as usual, about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on the conversation. Chat is open. Send in your chats, your questions, comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss in the chat. As usual, we have news topics to discuss. This week was a little bit lighter news week as opposed to last week, which was very news heavy with Andor and the Kathleen Kennedy stuff, which is also continuing into this week's news as we have gotten our first full official poster for Andor season 2, as well as a new featurette that is very much more in line with the tone of Andor season 1 than the trailer was, with its rock music and very different style. Also, more information on the Kathleen Kennedy situation, as well as a few other minor stories that we'll talk about. But as always, this is a stream really centered around your questions and your comments. And so we already have people starting to send it into the chat. We're going to plan on getting to everything we can in the next hour and a half to 2 hours in that chat. If you want to make sure you get something on tonight's stream, super chat is always appreciated. You can send it in and we will answer all super chats, of course, on tonight's stream. If you're a member of Patreon or YouTube memberships, make sure you look at those programs as well. There's a lot of great perks around the live element of the show, as well as priority chats for those members of a certain tier. So make sure you check that out. Check out both programs. You get videos early, scheduled a lot of things out early because of being gone on the trip. So it's been a big time for Patreon and people who wanted to get a lot more perks even earlier than usual. So keep checking out all those programs. We've had a lot of videos out in the last week or so as well. Shorts still 3 times a week, polls twice a day, every day. So everything has been up and running as usual, and we're excited to deliver you guys another stream. For those of you who have been kind of, with me being gone, realizing the schedule's been different around streams. We had a stream on a Sunday, we had a stream on a Wednesday, we had a stream today on a Thursday. Now we're going to get back to the Tuesday stream. So this is just because I got back late, or late for me, early for you guys yesterday, and had to drive home from Los Angeles. So it was a long day. So we're doing this kind of stream to push it back so I could be a part of it here on Thursday. So next week and for the foreseeable future, we'll be on Tuesdays again. So set your calendars if you've been missing those Tuesday streams for Star Wars Lads. We will be back every Tuesday as usual for these streams around 7:30 Pacific. All right, let's get into the news here. And the biggest news is coming from Andor, as you'd kind of expect. We're now T minus 6 weeks or so before the first episode, or a few, depending on whether they confirm their release strategy for this show, is going to be dropping. And with that, we get our season 2 poster, which is very much so indicative of Rogue One. Looks almost exactly the same, but instead of Scarif, it has the wheat fields of somewhere, maybe Gorman or wherever, or Gore or whatever the planet is called, the Gormans. You got some Yavin 4 in the background. You've got all the characters basically in the same shape they are in the Rogue One poster. So this is very much so trying to say, hey, yeah, that first trailer, it was exciting and fun, and maybe going after a new group of people, or a group of people that said, hey, Andor was boring, I didn't like Andor. That trailer went after those people. This poster, this featurette, both are like, yeah, and for the people who loved Andor season 1 and also love Rogue One, this show is that as well. It's not just going to be fun. And then with that, we got a featurette that was very, very cool. I really enjoyed the tone. I like seeing them talk about how this is going all out. This is a juggernaut season, is what they say, and I'm expecting that full force, jumping around to 4 years of time. We should be getting a lot faster pace than the first season. Things should be happening quickly. Arcs should be evolving and changing and exciting. This is the full rebellion season, and they really go into that in the featurette. Some really cool shots that we haven't seen. A lot of stuff centered around the Gorman massacre. it really does seem like most of the featurette and most of the original trailer is still focusing on the first few years of this 4-year gap as to not, give too many things away, but they don't necessarily need to worry about spoilers when we know what happens to all these characters and we know where most of them go. So it really is just the original characters who they have been kind of holding back on a little bit, mostly focusing on the Krennics and the Cassians and the Mon Mothmas and the Saw Gerreras. We know kind of what happens to those characters, right? So showing them in a little bit later of their story doesn't necessarily spoil it. One major shot I wanted to bring up that I really thought was cool and also pretty exciting is a shot of the Senate. And not only a shot of the Senate, but you see the main chancellor slash emperor's podium up in the middle of the Senate with a bunch of pods around it. So no Palpatine last season. Could we get Palpatine this time? We know traditionally he doesn't really appear in the Imperial Senate. So it will probably be Masamita or somebody like that. But would be very cool if we did actually get Palpatine for a scene, considering that this season is going to be focusing on how
Mhm.
the rebellion is just getting way bigger than the Empire ever could have imagined it would be. So, Sonic, with the new poster, with all the Rogue One connections, with the contrast specifically with the first trailer of Andor season 2 and also the featurette, what were your thoughts on our Andor news this week?
Well, it's about time, you know? It's it was just a weird feeling of, like, it's, like, a month away, guys, like, where's the marketing? And I know it's still very common for Disney Plus shows, not just Star Wars, but the MCU to kinda be doing this game, but I'm not a fan of it. I know there's some discussion recently that Disney just hired some new, like, marketing and publicity and distribution, so maybe they're trying to ramp it up for the movies and for Disney Plus a little bit better. Maybe their current strategy only worked in these big bursts, but yeah, I was very happy, very, very happy, very pleased by a lot of what I've been seeing, and yeah, I think that first trailer yeah, I don't love it. I love the meaning of having a song that's literally about revolution play behind. It's a pretty fun thing. Rock is oftentimes a revolutionary form of music. So conceptually great. I just felt it was like, oh, that was a strange choice, especially if you're trying to get people who are, to be frank, just the general audience who didn't pick up on the show during season 1, which is nearly 3 years ago, right? So it's like, all right, is this really the right choice to go with that song, to go with, like, a very action flary trailer? Maybe the action part, but I don't know about the music still. But, I grew to enjoy it. It was definitely fun to watch. It was different, and I guess if the point is to get people talking, it did its job. But like you said, this is a more traditional one. This is for more of the people who watched season 1, who enjoyed themselves throughout season 1, who probably told their friends, and then that's why I used to see a bit of a ramp up in the Nielsen ratings for the especially that back half, especially after the prison arc and everything for season 1 of Andor. And yeah, it's really good. The poster is also fairly nice. I'm not the biggest fan of floating heads in general, but I think this one is a little bit nicer, a little bit more variety than just, frankly, their heads. The that we I know it could be like that everything kinda converges on Gorman or Gore, whatever that planet is called, and it's nice getting massive confirmations that this is gonna be a massive set scale event with multiple characters, like you said, a lot of the original characters, possibly some new characters. But the one that's actually got me a little interested more than anything is, like, this week that we see on the poster because there's a chance it really could be Dantooine. I mean, I really do think that that one sort of throwaway line that Leia uses, it's like a bluff in the film, but it's a bluff that's enough for Tarkin to actually send people to go and investigate and find out, like, "Hey, that's been abandoned for a while now." So with the timing of everything, with how it's on the poster, I wouldn't be surprised maybe if that final arc maybe almost begins or maybe ends there for a lot of these original characters that we don't have any clue about in Rogue One or beyond. Uh, it also just I don't know. It's a very simple vista, but it's one that we haven't really seen in this sort of flavor since maybe one, Dantooine was featured in '03 Clone Wars with Mace Windu's fight against all the B2 battle droids and everything, so certainly a choice that I'm actually open to. Obviously, it could also be an absolutely original planet, but maybe it could just be Ferrex, right? Maybe they become like forced into, becoming a huge farming civilization instead of mining, kind of like how they're in season one. Though I do think, just from what we've gotten in EU and Legends, and including in canon, it's not really a thing for the Empire to like switch you over entirely to like one sort of system or other. It's more like they'll take everything that you're actually good at and strip you away from it and maximize it and abuse it, right? So yeah, I really liked it. I do really wanna see Mon Mothma, and that both the trailer and this special look definitely do make it seem like she's gonna be much more integral to the plot. She might be with the partisans at times, maybe she's gonna definitely be with Andor at times. I wanna see her interactions with Luthen, like, that was the one thing that, as much as I love Genevieve's performance, she is so isolated in season 1. Now I'm, like, very excited to see what brings her closer and closer before we actually do see her in Rebels, delivered to the Ghost Crew for her protection, to get her to make that public broadcast and everything, right? So everything was good about it. I can't wait to see how the Rogue One stuff ties in. I'm sure they've got a couple of aces up their sleeve, like maybe Bodhi Rook and, uh, you know, eh, yeah, the Ursos maybe
Mhm.
both cameo if they really want to do something there. And I feel like there's a chance of that, especially because of how much the partisans from the trailer onwards have become more and more big players, and especially after reading Mask of Fear, which is, again, great book. Check out a review. You do really feel like Saw is really stepping into this big role as like the tertiary head alongside Bale, alongside Mon Mothma, and I guess with Andor, maybe quad head with Luthen. So very cool to see all that kind of be unfolded. And I can't wait to see another trailer. I really hope there's a trailer too, because you need to get, with this final season, everyone on board, general audiences, diehards, like, because that's the one that's been critically acclaimed. Now let's make sure that's both critically and commercially acclaimed.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was a smart strategy for them to try to hit another audience. I do agree with you though. Would have been better maybe on a second trailer. Like you
Yeah.
have your locked in audience, right? Like I didn't think that first trailer wasn't necessarily bad because I'm already excited for the show, but it wasn't great. It didn't appeal to the people who have been waiting 3 years for the show. And so I think instead of scaring those people, maybe we should have gone into, "Hey, let's lock those people in, make sure they return, and then we'll go after all these new people." And I think that's what they did a great job of here. Featurettes, not as well as many people watch them, but hopefully people check them out. And I'm sure we'll be getting a second trailer soon. We got a second trailer for every show, and Andor just took a long time to get us our first. So hopefully we get a second trailer probably around that month mark ish before the show drops, and then we will be able to, or celebration, but celebration's really close to this. It's like the week the show comes out, right before show comes out. So we'll probably be getting more information there, but hopefully we get a good, more traditional Andor trailer here pretty soon that we can discuss and a lot more people can see and get on board for as we get closer and closer to the show coming out. But yes, that is exciting. Very excited for all the Andor news and for Andor to get in full swing here. We just had Daredevil launch as well. So Disney Plus is really making their push into the first half of 2025. And it's kind of about time after a few months of really nothing being on the platform of real note. So now we've got both of these shows back to back, leading into Celebration, leading into May the 4th. Hopefully, it is a time to be optimistic around the future of Star Wars, or at least around Star Wars in 2025. But let's move on to our second story, which has been a wild one around Star Wars recently. I mean, the story of Kathleen Kennedy getting fired or getting or retiring or getting released has been something around the Star Wars community since The Last Jedi came out in 2017. And it finally kind of broke last week. I know Sanak talked about it last week in the stream. So we're not really going to repeat kind of all the details from last week, but then even continuing off of what Sanak got to talk about last week and continuing into this week, Kathleen Kennedy has clarified things and actually moved a direction for her retiring now, and kind of given us a little bit of insight on what was true, what was not true about a lot of the original breaking news. So when it comes to Kathleen Kennedy, she spoke to Deadline and revealed she wasn't retiring, which was discussed previously. But what we did not discuss was now her appearances at some film festivals and some different things. And she has said that now, to summarize, she's planning on retiring within the year ish. She's still actively working on everything Star Wars. She is still completely committed to her job, but she has been seeking a succession plan for a while. And that is just a part of the nature of running one of these big studios. But to have that kind of confirmation from her now a few times that within a year I should be gone, that's a big deal. And it's not just a big deal for those people who love or hate Kathleen Kennedy. It's a big deal for the complete change of Star Wars right in the midst of when we are seeing Star Wars pick a brand new direction. And I think that's what's kind of crazy about this whole thing. And not just with that, with Kathleen leaving, it's with Bob Iger leaving Disney as well here pretty soon and needing to choose a successor. So you have both the biggest heads of what Lucasfilm does
Yeah.
are both leaving as Lucasfilm is trying to find its footing again for the first time. Now, Bob Iger hasn't named a successor either. He's extended multiple times when he said he's leaving. So it's not confirmed either that he's going to actually be leaving Disney, because he is really trying to get them back on track for the second time after the pandemic and Bob Chapek's change as well. But this is, I think, bigger than just a, a lot of people think, oh, it's just a change in leadership. But no, these movies, everything around these movies, these projects, they're 2-3 years down the line. So anything that Kathleen Kennedy has going right now, you're going to end up seeing under new leadership. But then it's what comes next. And I think that's why she talks about looking for people internally, that they have a great bench, that they have a lot of people who could do the job. I think it's why they will end up looking internally. We did talk a few weeks ago, I can't remember, about a new hire that they had in the upper echelon of Lucasfilm employees, a new VP, if I remember right. That's a big deal when you're hearing that Kathleen Kennedy has been planning her succession for years now, right? Also, you have the Dave Filoni promotion, you have the Jon Favreau involvement with Mandalorian. Personally, to me, I think it makes more sense to do a Jon Favreau than a Dave Filoni. As great as Dave Filoni has been for Star Wars, he is somebody who's always been on the creative side. I think Jon Favreau has had a little bit more experience with producing. But again, if you hired Jon Favreau, it would be similar to just hiring Kathleen Kennedy originally, who had no studio experience, just a producing experience, right? So that is the big question for Lucasfilm. But as of now, we are having more of a confirmation straight from Kathleen Kennedy's mouth that she is planning on retiring. That part is not untrue. It's just that she's not leaving tomorrow or next week or really within the year. And it could get pushed even longer considering Lucasfilm has a massive movie coming out next year that really needs to relaunch everything about Star Wars in the theaters with The Mandalorian and Grogu. Would she really leave right after that? Maybe she would walk off on a high note. And it's like winning the Super Bowl or something and leaving with your last ring, right? But I don't know. I think there's still so much to do. There's so many things they've announced. She talks about Sean Levy's movie here too. There's so many things going on. Even if there's, a general lack of interest around a lot of what Kathleen Kennedy had going on around Star Wars, it's almost scarier to have all these projects going and then just have your creative head just leave. And then everybody else is like, okay, now we've got to not only pick up the pieces, but we got to figure out what's next after that. How do we continue building off of what has been set up? And it was something that we just saw Disney do with Bob Iger, who set up everything for Disney Plus and said, okay, now I'm going to give it to everybody else to work on. Then it all started falling apart after he left. So we'll see how it goes. But it is now confirmed from her that she is planning on retiring within the next year or so. When you hear that, Sanak, based on the news that we heard last week, the wishy-washiness around not necessarily commitment from her, but a lot of reporting otherwise, and a lot of the contradicting stories between Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, all these different companies. What are your thoughts now on the latest Kathleen Kennedy news?
Hmm. I mean, it seems about right. I mean, I know when I brought it up with you, it was just like, "Oh, man," like, everyone's going crazy. It's like, "Ah, she's getting forced out, well, this and that." It's like and she might be. We don't ever know the politics of these games, but of this succession strategies of writing an entire empire, basically, right? That is Disney. But at the same time, it's like she hasn't done anything so extremely bad that, like, the whole brand's falling apart. It's like a lot of the stuff that has happened with Disney Plus has happened to the MCU as well, right? So it's not like it was just the Star Wars brand that feels like it's been diluted and slowed down and all that. And I mean, if you even look at stuff like Iger's biography, right? He even talks about how she wanted to keep Star Wars eventicized, right? It should feel like it's got small gaps and you're always coming back to the next chapter when it comes out. Even if we're not doing Skywalker Saga, every film should feel important. So should like every show, right? And if it is a show that comes out weekly, comes out every year, well, then it should be animation or something, kind of like how it was in that late stage, era of George Lucas's Star Wars, right? Where a lot of the creatives and a lot of the people that she had known and worked closely with kind of got a lot of their start. So it's not like she was completely starting, like, in a completely underdeveloped position. She wasn't. It's just that maybe she never really was ready for a studio head position in a Disney company. Maybe she would have been much better with the George Lucas behind her, right? Maybe it could have been like a prototype for what we hope to see with Safran and Gunn now that they're running DC, right? So I think knowing all that, seeing what Iger said, including the fact that she was pushing for post 2019 to give more time for the Rise of Skywalker, whether you love it or hate it or just mad about it, I think we all agree that a little bit more time would have hurt, a little bit more runtime would definitely not have hurt that film. And it's like, all right, yeah. So it's like if your own CEO, the guy who created that succession strategy for his own departure from the company is admitting like I was the one kind of pushing for it. I was pushing for content over art in some ways, right? Yeah, I do have to give her a little bit of love, a little bit of like appreciation for what she tried to do. Was she successful? No, no, not 100%. But she feels a little bit better than like 2005 to 2012 Star Wars to me in a lot of ways. The fact that we get so much live action, all that. So I'm gonna always appreciate that. But I'm also definitely open for her to, take a step back. It's nice to see that at least in the creator world, older people are making way for the next generation or someone younger at least, right? Might not be happening with the rest of the different things going on in the world right now, but it's nice to see someone in her 70s be like, "Yeah, I am a little tired. I need to take a step back. Maybe this is right." And if she's been planning this for a while, she never had any qualms about it happening around now. Now, with the like you said, Iger also kind of preparing his own succession, and again for a second time, and you can't really mess up the second time for sure after a lot of the mistakes that Chapek did. Like, oh boy, that 2020 investors call was terrible for Star Wars and it was really bad for MCU too. You can't have another one of that happening. And on top of that, he screwed up the parks too, which even the down CEOs of Disney's reign have never really done something like that. So that lining up with her plans and then her not being in charge of Disney and she has to it's gonna be a difficult challenge for her to have her succession, feel like it's well earned, feel like it's on her own, and feel like it's not gonna be way down or change or be so affected, what Iger is doing. So I think that what we're hearing about her also maybe staying on, producing a couple more films as needed, like where she's been invested in for a while, also gives me confidence that she's not just dropping it and going, right? She's still going to be involved. She's just not going to be the head. And if we do get Favreau, I think I am also of agreement that it's better than going with Filoni. I would not trust him to do that. And that's not to disrespect him, but he just got CC and it's definitely a strain for him to develop his live action skill set with Ahsoka, with the gaps that that show's gonna have, possible New Republic finale film, and then now you're gonna say, okay, now he's in charge of continuity and how all these different stories fit together, working with the Lucasfilm Story Group, which again, he's not the best when it comes to that either. And then on top of that, you're like, oh, now here's let's decide the future and direction and the 10-year, the 5-year, the 15-year plans, the different mediums we can explore. Are we getting into VR or more intermediate? That's like he can have input, but he should not be the deciding factor there. Now, if you say him and Filoni together, I would not mind that either. But then I would actually ask and argue that let that succession for her come at a time when they finish off this little Mandoverse. Like,
Yeah.
let them focus on that. If you're gonna say like, okay, now we're at the end here when we have to get a little bit of a burst back with Mandalorian Grogu onwards, like with every franchise in Disney kind of taking a dip and now trying to build themselves back with tighter budgets, a little bit more smarter inclusiveness with creative input, but also cutting back as needed with the executives, making a little bit smarter with their marketing, whatever it might be, hiring new people. Do not put these two in charge when they need to also be focusing, above all else, the creative, strong finish to this era for this first 10 years of the New Republic, and then set up avenues for other creatives to take place the next 20 years leading into The Force Awakens, right? So it all makes sense. I'm sorry to the grifters that, for a minute there, you were a little upset you couldn't keep on using Kathleen Kennedy thumbnails. Now here you can for maybe another year or two or whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, she is a legendary producer. She was given a very difficult task. Was she 100% successful? No. But I think she's done well enough that when she does finally leave, hopefully we're going to be in a good position where the next executive can take what she did really well and build off of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with Kathleen Kennedy as well, being handpicked by Lucas, she had a lot of high expectations, and I think that's one of the things that has led to a lot of the controversy around her, and it's not just the sequels and stuff, because for a while, Disney wasn't getting the slack that she was, and I think it was the direct connection there, to George Lucas, but really, when we're sitting here looking at it, she's had a lot of financial successes, a lot of problems with story. I think that's been the
Yeah.
thing, which is kind of interesting because I mean that's what her job was before, right? Producing. She's done a pretty good job at actually producing the movies, making things that make money, but she's not been on story before. So it would be interesting if they went with a tandem thing like DC has decided to do, which again, DC, similar to Marvel, they're sub studios, right? They're a sub studio of Disney. So you have the larger studio of Disney controlling the whole thing, and then not just the larger studio of Disney, but you have Bob Iger, who's the head of the entire Walt Disney Corporation, above that studio. So it's the third row down on the term power scale of Disney. So there's two people ahead of Kathleen Kennedy who can really overrule her, and I think that can help if you're looking for somebody, if you were to do a co-CEO type of thing with Dave Filoni and with Jon Favreau, or just basically say that CCO is now completely in charge of all creative decisions, and CEO will now be uh, Jon Favreau, and he's going to run the business side. I think it makes it a little bit easier when you're a sub studio underneath a massive corporation like Disney who can also still handle a lot of the logistical side, to have somebody a bit more creative there. But yeah, I completely agree with you about the Mandalorian thing, because one of the things that's made the Mandalorian a lesser product since 2020 has been the fact that it's been so spread out to so many things, whether it was Boba Fett, whether it was Ahsoka, whether it was Mando season 3, and now Mandalorian and Grogu. The creative team behind these things has been so spread out on so many different projects. The cohesion is not there. And so to bump up these guys, unless they're going to give up full control, directing and writing, to bump these guys up to a higher position, which I'm sure they would happily accept, considering the pay raise, considering the stability of the job. Why not accept it if it was offered to you? But to bump them up in the midst of making The Mandalorian now basically your Skywalker saga, making it the centerpiece of what Star Wars is in the theaters, making it is the centerpiece of what Star Wars is on TV. It would be a big decision to make right in the midst of that, and one that I don't know if it would help the franchise creatively, which is the biggest complaint around Star Wars for the last 15 years has not been the fact that we can't get projects made, even though there has been plenty of that as well. But it's the fact that creatively, most people have been mixed to unhappy with a lot of the direction they've taken Star Wars, whether it be the sequel trilogy, whether it be the failed anthology movie spin-offs, whether it be the future seasons of Mandalorian, whether it be a lot of these spin-off shows or new IPs like The Acolyte. The creative part has not been cohesive. And so what do you do there if you ruin one of the big things you have going by taking the creative heads of that and being like, well, now you have to run the entire company, and it's not just movies and TV shows, it's books and video games, and like you said, VR, and running Industrial Light and Magic, and running Skywalker Sound, and running all those things. You have to do all that now. And before, you just had to worry about the Mandalorian. So yeah, that's where it's kind of scary, even as somebody who hasn't been thrilled with a lot of Star Wars stuff recently. And I think sometimes a change in leadership is a good thing, especially when you've had it for like she's been there for 13 years.
Yeah.
She's almost going there for 15 years. That's a long time when she was a young producer at the time. It makes sense to have refreshed creative energy in there, but in the midst of trying to relaunch the entire Star Wars brand in theaters, I think this is a really weird time to be talking about this. And the fact that she has not given credence to the stories that have been put out about her, but given credence to the idea that she is actively pursuing retiring, and she kind of wants to retire, but she's working her way towards finding that plan. It is a little it's pretty concerning to me, just with everything that I'm in the midst of that, and not when it's
Yeah.
over. Like if Marvel was to say, okay, after Endgame, Kevin Feige's retiring, that makes sense. But if they were to say, okay, after Infinity War comes out, Kevin Feige's retiring during the edit of Endgame, and it's like, okay, that's a little concerning. So, yeah, so I'm mixed around the Kathleen Kennedy decision, but I do think it's not like they don't know that. They're planning these things out. They're actively trying to make the best product they can make. And really, I think one of the things that hinges on whether Bob Iger retires or not is because when Bob Iger left last time, everything was doing well. Star Wars was making tons of money. Disney Plus had a great launch with the huge hits like The Mandalorian. Marvel was at its peak with Endgame. All their brands were making money when he retired. So he felt like, okay, now is the time I can actually step away and everything's great. If Star Wars is still failing next year, then how do you I don't think he steps away until he finds the right replacement and finds the right direction. So I think a lot of her leaving hinges on the fact that they find the correct direction for Star Wars as she steps away. So we'll see how it goes. We do have some super chats here. First from Toydarian Dan, who says 25,000 subs. Thank you so much, Toydarian Dan. It was a milestone we crossed today. Thank you so much to everybody who subscribed, enjoyed our content for the last few years. And yeah, we're climbing the ranks here. 25K. Pretty excited about that. 5K or so in the first couple months of 2025. So that's pretty good progress. We're excited to continue to grow, but we appreciate all of you who have joined us. So thank you so much for the super chat to celebrate 25K. And then Anthony, continuing on this same topic, says, just wanted to repeat what I said last week to Liam, that many of the fandom menace think they're Neo fighting the Matrix, and that they have legit memes of Kathleen Kennedy being Satan. If they're Neo, I'm Agent Smith, their arch nemesis. And I also hope, again, like I said last week, that it's not used to go after canon fans, sequel fans, or those who like both EU and canon, such as I am. Well, I think, as with anything, right, you're going to have people who want to try to claim any form of hire and fire. You don't just see this in the movie industry. You see it with sports too. If a big
Oh
player
yeah.
gets traded that everybody hated, on all the fans hated, then they're all excited because they think they did it. Kathleen Kennedy's not getting fired. Otherwise, she would have been gone, and there wouldn't be, oh, yeah, we have a year to find the succession plan. No, she's not getting fired. She's leaving. So that's one thing that contradicts the fandom menace, as you call it, idea that they're the ones that got her kicked out. Maybe they partially can, the constant battering she receives maybe made her want to retire. That could be a chip on their shoulder. But no, she's not getting fired by Disney. She's choosing to leave. Otherwise, when this news broke, we would have found out that, yeah, she's leaving actually in a month and they've already named her successor. So that's something, some ammunition you can use if you want to fight back. But overall, this shouldn't really change how anybody feels about Star Wars. This is just a general course of the movie industry. This happens a lot. She's actually been there longer than a lot of executives are in their roles in the movie industry. Most people don't get this long to really find a direction, especially for a studio that basically only runs one franchise. I know they've tried to get two other ones off the ground, but haven't necessarily done that with Indiana Jones and with Willow. So it's basically a one franchise studio, and she's had a long time to figure it out. A lot of hits, a lot of misses, mostly mixed stuff. And I think it's always good for new creative people to come in and see what ideas we can get. But yeah, I mean, we might have to deal with that, Anthony. You might have to deal with that as a sequel fan or as a canon fan, the people starting to act like their point of view is now the best one because Kathleen Kennedy's no longer there to back you as a canon fan or a sequel fan. But overall, whoever comes in next with Star Wars, the idea that they have now submitted that Star Wars is a complete timeline, you're going to have to deal with sequel characters. You're going to have to deal with canon. So you're going to have to make it better. And ultimately, as a canon fan or sequel fan, you can really only go up, considering the divisiveness around the sequels, that if the sequels can't really get worse, right, in the general fandom. So if they make something and it's great, then slowly you'll start to be on the side of the people who have, like us, can always say, well, we always liked the prequels because we grew up with them, right? You can start to be on that side for the sequels if they continue to make stuff that gets better. And whoever comes in next is going to have to do that. They can't just ignore the sequels altogether. They're going to have to do that, not least of all because they currently have things in production that are centered around the sequels.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, the fact of the matter is when people were talking about the prequels, they were frankly pretty upset, a lot of them online, and it definitely boiled over. But we lived in a very different time, right? We didn't have social media anywhere near as advanced as today. We didn't have everyone carrying the internet in their palm of their hand. It just wasn't a thing, right? So if people were really upset about it, they were telling their friends in person. They were making films like Revenge of the Fanboys and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a really weird time, but it was in a really strange way, a more honest time, right? You look at today now with the sequels, how when it started, Instagram was up and going, Facebook, all these other things had become huge and evolved, right? We've become a world really that has become a lot more dependent on algorithms driving people. If you like one or two things, bam, here are just four or five other things just exactly like it. It's everything about the internet is curated now. It wasn't necessarily the same way when we were prequel fans. And that's for better or worse, right? For most part, it's really just to market, it's just to make money. But there's definitely people who weaponize that for their own services, for their social media, whatever it may be, right? For their point of view. We can't say that we're completely unbiased about that either, right? It affects everybody, but definitely people who are on platforms like YouTube, like Twitter and everything that you can make money off of, like kind of coming with more stronger reactionary takes, either super negative, super positive, right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's gonna happen that way. And I think that definitely affected the sequels. It was definitely a very politically fraught era too when all that happened, right? It wasn't like COVID where everybody's inside and you're just like, oh man, I love the Clone Wars. Oh man, I love Mando season 2, right? It was a very different time when we kind of came off the high of The Force Awakens and Rogue One, right? Once we got into Last Jedi and some of its divisiveness, yeah, I mean, there are definitely things people do not agree about even today. But I think instead of appreciating some of that stuff, instead of having a lot more honest discussions about it, people were just kind of forced into two different lanes when it's not really like that for a lot of people. There are things you love and hate about that film, right? And then The Rise of Skywalker became such a reactionary thing because of things online became being as reactionary, right? So yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think I want to stress that it's a bit of an artificial thing. Right? You can honestly talk to people that have such different viewpoints about anything. Sit down for 5 minutes, and you'll find common ground on that. Just like that, you can find it in Star Wars. And the fact that you are an EU, the fact that you are a EU and canon fan, that's only going to be appreciated by people who genuinely love Star Wars because there's incredible stories in both, right? To ignore both, it's silly, right? I mean, there's always this argument that like, oh man, canon's bringing Thrawn, they're bringing all these EU characters. Yeah, and I know some of them will never be as good, but hey, I get to see them. I get to actually witness what they're doing. I might never get the same mental focus, the internal workings of them. I might never get to see the insane scope of stuff like a New Jedi Order because it's 19 books and you can't make 19 films or anything like that. But it's still really nice that they're actually still appreciating all that old stuff and making it try to work with this new canon, with what's here, right? And it's not new either. It's 10 years. You can rage about it, you can do all these other things, but it's been here for 10 years, really. So, yeah, I mean, those things are still gonna be there, but understand it's artificial and that if you choose to engage with Star Wars with people who are like-minded, you'll find that group of people, and if you choose to engage with a bunch of other different people, you'll actually find a really interesting mix of different Star Wars opinions, right? So, just keep it up, ignore the Kennedy demon edits or whatever you see online. The only way you're gonna see more and more of that is if you like dislike it, if you comment, if you're trying to make it like, oh no, it's like, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying give up, but don't give energy to it sometimes, and you'll notice that those algorithms don't really have as much power as you think when that happens, when you kind of take one small step back.
Those are all good points. Yeah. I mean, when you don't engage, that's when it becomes a little less meaningful to you, I guess. That's one of the ways I've approached some of this stuff over the years for sure. Is I used to have a lot more social media when I was younger, and then I realized, well, if I don't actually engage with this, then I don't end up really caring, and that makes me a lot happier. So you do you, Anthony, but yeah, it's something that's probably not going to go away for a very long time until well after. And even after she leaves, if the next person does a great job, then you're still going to be seeing people throwing rocks at Kathleen Kennedy's legacy, right? Because they're going to say, well, look at this person versus what Kathleen Kennedy had. It's just the nature of the beast, and it's going to be what happens. But briefly, because of the quote she said, because of the word bench that she used for Lucasfilm, I did want to bring up a few people who that could actually mean, because everybody goes directly to Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. And of course, that makes the most sense. The centerpiece of Lucasfilm has always been Star Wars live action movies, and then now Star Wars live action TV. So it makes sense that the two people kind of creating the Star Wars multimedia story that is The Mandalorian right now, as it's going to cross into theatrical film, would be the next people who might run Star Wars, right? But there are plenty of other people who have been at Lucasfilm for a very long time that absolutely could make sense from a business standpoint just to promote. And I think the number one person you look at is Carrie Beck, who's been a producer on basically everything they've made. And she's been around for in Star Wars for a long time. You could see her just promoted immediately to be her Kathleen Kennedy's replacement. Wouldn't be a sexy name because it's not Jon Favreau or Dave Filoni or Steven Spielberg or somebody everybody's familiar with. But I think that's kind of what Star Wars needs, is they do need somebody who's not going to dominate the headlines. I wouldn't be upset if, like you said, Sanak, I wouldn't be upset if Favreau or Filoni got announced. But I think right now Star Wars needs a good combination of that business experience, people who know how to run the studio, and the people who are creative. And Kathleen is kind of right in the middle of both. She had never had experience running a studio or in studio development, but she had a lot of experience getting movies off the ground, singular movies, helping get productions off the ground and working with a lot of the best people. But she had also not been necessarily one of the creatives around that. She'd always been in the business side with the producing roles. So she was a good bridge, but maybe somebody there to help her could have been who was more specifically business minded, could have made things run smoothly. So Carrie Beck, vice president of live action development and production, I think that seems like one of the obvious people who could go up there. The other person who's a co-president with Kathleen Kennedy, we don't really talk about her very much because she is a little bit more on the managerial side, is Linwin Brennan, who could be promoted as well. But she kind of has a high role already, so it would be more just giving her completely the reins. But the person I brought up earlier, because I did remember this story, and I went back and found his name, is it was Derek Hoffman, who has had experience producing things like X-Men and leading development on a lot of things like X-Men in the past, and just got hired about a month and a half ago as vice president of development. So when you look at who's going to be the president of the company, development is one of the most important things they do. It would make sense to hire within on somebody who is actively working on development, especially if you're somebody who they're trying to use to succeed the person who's overseeing what Star Wars is supposed to be for the next 10 years or next 5 years. So if you have somebody in there who's both a fresh voice, a fresh face, who might bring new ideas like Derek could, but also knows what they're currently working on and is not just completely new, that could be a good choice. I think that's a sleeper pick for sure. But you also have another number other names. Other one that I feel like nobody talks about, and I don't necessarily think he'd be perfectly suited for the role either, like Filoni would, but he's been in Star Wars forever. John Knoll has been in Star Wars
Mm,
forever. He runs ILM. He's been involved in Lucas Star Wars before Dave Filoni was there. He's been involved with all these things now, running the biggest visual effects company in the world, is not the same as running an entire studio, but he's been around Star Wars and the creative side of Star Wars enough. He pitched the idea for Rogue One. He could be somebody who's pretty interesting if they were to hire him as the next president. So I think that's another sleeper pick that I haven't heard a lot of people say. Everybody's kind of just going with the big creatives around Star Wars on the filmmaking side, but he has been there in the executive side. He has been there with the legacy side with George Lucas. He is now overseen, he's been there in a very high level through two administrations on Lucasfilm. And he does have some creative experience being involved a little bit with Rogue One, and also with visual effects being such a big part of the prequels. If you watch some of those behind the scenes documentaries, he does have a lot of creative conversations with George Lucas directly. So I think that would be an interesting choice as well.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they go for something that's a little different than we all expect, just
Yeah.
because that would be like a nice momentum shift. But at the same time, do you want to make something such a like it's a double-edged sword. You do that, are they ready to really embody everything that a lot of Star Wars fans are looking for, which is planning and being super creative and different, right? And it's an oxymoron. It really is, right? And I think I brought it up in last week's stream, but it's not like Kathleen didn't try that herself, right? She was around all these incredible creatives, and she was a producer on The Goonies, on in Indiana Jones, when she was on Jurassic Park, right? Obviously, she has a little bit of input. Obviously, she had some great things to say, and she moved all the right pieces, and she's aware of all that. But she's around these people who changed Hollywood, right? They came at a time when the studio system had collapsed. They were literally dubbed New Hollywood, right? They changed cinema into like this blockbuster format that we recognize today, right? And what have we done since then? We have done everything to make it bigger, bolder, louder, all of that, right? So uh, I think she saw that. She saw the Spielberg, she saw the Lucas, she saw the Coppola, she saw everybody that she was around in those era, and she's like, okay, what can I do as a studio head to not only foster Lucasfilm as a place for creatives, but develop them into like the same sort of creatives that can be smart financially with what their stories are, but still make some incredibly engaging and different genre work, right? And a big influx point, even though people will be like, "It was The Last Jedi," Ryan Johnson gives you. No, I think she actually did everything quite right there. He was still the first director, I think, in Star Wars history, I believe, maybe other than like Kirshner, who got everything done on time, if not early, right? Like, and he had such a good relationship with the Lucasfilm storyroom and all that. I think she tried to basically create the next version, next generation, these sort of creatives for Star Wars and for filmmaking in general with the solo film with Lord and Miller. We're seeing them now. They got Project Hail Mary coming up. They're known for the Spider-Verse films. They've had a lot of different projects in animation that have done really well. But it just didn't work out. It just didn't work out because there's something about filmmaking that is inherently radical. You can't, like, force it. You can't mold it. You can push it and nudge it, but it still is born out of someone's creativity first, right? So, yeah, I mean, we heard the stories about how, like, they were willing to, like, film exactly what Kasdan was saying and what they wanted to do, but then we also heard that they were super slow about things, that they'd only use 3 or 4 sets and have hundreds of their crew just kinda waiting, not sure what's going on, right? So, yeah, I do think that she definitely tried, and then that was a film that she had to, like, salvage because once they saw everything, once we saw the general direction, once we saw the rest of the team was really dissatisfied, it's like, "Oh, no, like, no, no, we still need to make a film. This is still a movie-making business centered around making money." Right? And it sucks because I think there's still a lot there that's really good in Solo, right? It's still a beautiful film to look at. I do think Alden is great. I think Emily Clark is pretty great. Like everything casting wise is pretty on top. I don't love L3, but I still think it's a smart choice to go for. When Fleabag was in full motion, when it was at the peak of its popularity and all that, it all made sense. But at the end of the day, it just didn't work out, right? You can make these big bets, you can force all of these dreams to come to fruition by planning and being an external producer, but as a studio head, that doesn't necessarily work the same way, right? So yeah, it's a little unfortunate. I'm not going to deny that, but you can also look at Lord and Miller and their history as much success as they've had, they've also squandered a lot of it. Like the Spidey Sonyverse was supposed to be bigger. Like they had the Spider-Man Noir show with Cage because he had already portrayed the animated version. The Silk show got canceled. They had a Gwen Stacy, Spider Gwen, and others animated show that they were planning on doing. None of that is happening now, and there's a lot of rumors with how Beyond has been delayed for so long that like, hey, no, like, animators were so stressed out for Across that they have a really bad relationship. They're always changing things last minute for them, and that doesn't work for animation pipelines. And they're still doing quite well. I'm not gonna deny that. But if Solo had worked with their vision and everyone had enjoyed it, they would be huge. They would be like the Russos where they could come back, but have even more creative flair than the Russos have shown with the MCU. So I won't fault her for what she tried to do and what ultimately came out, but you can only imagine, like, if that idea of, like, somehow creating these filmmakers, the next Spielbergs, the next Lucases, had actually come to fruition with Solo, just how differently things would have been by now in 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are good points as well. And I think that'll wrap up our Kathleen Kennedy discussion for now. Again, this is a chat or a stream led by your guys' chat. So now we've gotten through the main stories. These were big ones. And since I missed last week, we kind of went a little heavier on Kathleen Kennedy, which was, a massive story last week as well. So make sure you send all your questions, your comments, your theories, anything you like into the chat. We will try to get to all of them. We're going to start going through the non-super chat chats now. Again, if you want to make sure you get a chat on tonight's stream, send in a super chat. You can also check out our YouTube memberships or Patreon programs. We do have perks for certain tiers that will allow you to get priority chat access. And if you're on Patreon only, you can send it in on the Patreon page. I post early every week the link to the stream, so you can see the link to the stream. You just comment on that post there, and then you can get your comment on tonight's stream. I will constantly be referring to that as well throughout tonight's stream. So send in anything you'd like. We're going to go for about another 45 minutes to an hour here. on this stream this week. And then again, for those people just joining now, because we have a lot more people who join now than were here earlier when we started the stream, we will be back on Tuesdays now. Still, as always, it's just been a modified schedule for me while I was gone on my trip for a couple weeks. So we'll be back every Tuesday. So if Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday, or forgot when we did the one before I left, was whichever days we've been doing them, if that hasn't worked for you, and Tuesday was your day for Star Wars Lads, as I know Skywalker's Academy said, finishing up another show and then joining in a little bit. We will be back on Tuesdays as usual, 7:30 Pacific time. Hope to see you there. All right, let's get into the chat starting from the top, which is going to be with Critical Thinker 066, who said that he's reiterating a comment so that I could respond to this. This was a comment, I believe, from 2 streams ago. I watched a little bit of both streams, or tried to when I had a chance. But Critical Thinker said, I finished reading Legacy of the Force, really hated Revelation. Jaina randomly became a cheerleader for the Mandos. Then Jason somehow almost died to the Mandos. It felt like reading a Garth Ennis superhero book. You don't like Garth Ennis superhero books? Critical Thinker also said, but Invincible was really good. In my opinion, the best Jaina book in the EU so far, and it's also resolved some of the weirder inconsistencies of the series. Though the ending wrap up was pretty rushed, I felt like Tahiri's fall was super rushed. But on the other hand, the series did a great job developing Ben and making him a super likable character. Overall, I really enjoyed the series, but yeah, it's flawed and does unfortunately waste a lot of its potential. Still did the Solo kid turns evil, depressed Luke story far better than the sequel trilogy, in his opinion. And spoiler-free thoughts on Fate of the Jedi. Okay, well, with the first thing, I'm glad you enjoyed a lot of what Legacy of the Force had to offer, and then, saw the flaws that most of us have seen with the structure and kind of the general idea. I think Legacy of the Force, when all is said and done, and again, without giving too many spoilery details away, although I know you've read it, Legacy of the Force is something that has a concept that's it's a story built on its concept. It's not a story that seemed to be designed prior and then the concept unfolds from actual story arcs that they intended to develop. So that is, I think, the overall inherent problem with Legacy of the Force, and it's why it does wrap up a little rushed and why some of its best parts are all at the end, because it's like they find their footing with the story. They kind of know where they want it to go, and the big character arcs start to actually unfold and matter towards the end, and then it's like, oh, but now it's over. So then for my thoughts on Fate of the Jedi, I think you're going to enjoy Fate of the Jedi a little bit more if you're interested in something that's different, because Fate of the Jedi is so different from the general direction of Legacy of the Force that I think you'll enjoy it if you come at it from that angle. If you're somebody who doesn't like the Clone Wars, 2008 Clone Wars, or you don't like that being a part of the EU, this definitely takes heavy cues from that. If you're not sure if I don't know if you know what the story is about yet, but I think as the final series, or the final multi-book series in the EU that continued post Return of the Jedi, it's one that certainly has less inherent like character problems as the Legacy of the Force does, but it's one that isn't necessarily all as interesting or exciting as like the general concepts around Legacy of the Force or New Jedi Order. It's one that takes a different approach. There are some weird things in it that you're like, okay, I guess that happened. But then there are some other things that are really, really cool and badass. If you liked Ben from Legacy, Ben is also great in Fate of the Jedi. And when you read Fate of the Jedi, you're going to be bummed that we never got more of Ben after that because the EU ended. So I think there are a lot of really good things that Fate of the Jedi does with some of the best parts of what Legacy set up. But like Legacy, it still is trying to figure out what to do with the politics and the galaxy and the threats, and like trying to figure out how to make all that, and doesn't necessarily make for the most interesting story. And unfortunately, unlike New Jedi Order, where it seemed like, okay, they actually mapped the whole thing out and they're like, yes, this is what's going to happen beat by beat by beat. And maybe we stretched it too much, because there are some books in there that you read that you're like, nothing happened in this book. But when it hits because they planned it out. A Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi don't necessarily feel as much like that. Fate of the Jedi more so because the story is not quite as interesting. But Legacy of the Force takes a while to find its footing. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully you enjoy it. It's awesome to see that you're almost done with the post Return of the Jedi EU. You've been working on that for a while, and it's been fun keeping up with you, slowly getting through this whole thing. And or not slowly, you really fly through these books. I'm very impressed at how quickly you get through some of these initiatives. But yeah, I'm hoping you enjoy Fate of the Jedi a little more than Legacy, since it didn't seem to work for you as much.
Yeah, not much more I can add to that. I will say that some of the Troy Denningisms that I don't really love about Legacy of the Force are tempered to a degree in Fate of the Jedi, and like Liam said, it's a very different series. Ben Skywalker is huge. Some of the love interest, will they, won't they stuff is actually fairly well done, in my opinion. Um, it's nice that almost trying to set up and deal with the actual legacy comics. You know, that's still a while away. You see them really trying to shape and form and take some of the very specific ideas at the end of Legacy of the Force and at least like bridge to making some more concrete stuff happening there. Obviously, it feels almost spin-offy in a lot of ways. And I'm sure you've seen all the thumbnails about Abeloth Online and every single YouTube video, especially with everything with Mortis and everything going on with the Ahsoka show. And yeah, I can't say I loved how much they leaned on OA Clone Wars and very specific and strange storyline that I'm sure even Filoni has probably doesn't link up with 100%, right? But I do appreciate how kind of out there it gets and how it's kind of dealing with some repercussions from some of the execution of Legacy of the Force, honestly. So yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. It just so happens to have a lot less of like an interesting pull in the same way as like a New Jedi Order did, and then um, it's in some ways a bit smaller scale relatively, right? Than how Legacy is, and it's almost like Legacy and it should have maybe swapped a little bit of
Hmm.
importance, right, around, right? This should have been the big series to come about after, you deal with the legacy of New Jedi Order instead of the legacy of the Second Galactic Civil War, like, and all the kind of 9/11s, early 2000s, um, prequel-esque connections that they're trying to make there versus what Fate of the Jedi, I think, smartly did. It's just like, let's continue with our own story, pull inspiration and cues as needed, but don't try to be like, hey, here's the equivalent that you're going to get in book form 60, 70 years, or sorry, 40 years after everything going on in the Battle of Endor.
And then piggybacking off of that, Critical Thinker says, don't get me wrong, I really like Legacy of the Force. I just felt like it's just a few small changes. It could have been so much better, which is frustrating, even if I still think the end product is very good. It's not as good as New Jedi Order, but I still rank the best of it pretty highly amongst the EU. Yeah, and that's very fair. I think that's what the mixed bag of Legacy of the Force is like I said, it's a concept. It's a concept that could work really, really well depending on how you do it, and it's something that within that concept they tried to build a bigger world around, tried to make it as big for the EU as New Jedi Order, but also it's very character heavy. And because it's very character heavy, New Jedi Order, yeah, it has big character moments, but it's about the use on Long. It's about a new threat, an extra galactic threat. This being centered around things that we already know, characters we've known for years and years and years, and trying to change them and do new things with them, make it like the ultimate story for each one of them, try to give each one of them a new thing. Um, I think that plays to the disservice of that story versus the way New Jedi Order was more focused. Even if it's overlong, it's more focused. And kind of with like High Republic right now too, it's overlong, but it's more focused. It has an end game that it's going for. Whereas Legacy of the Force only being the 9 books, Fate of the Jedi as well only being the 9 books, but Fate of the Jedi I think bites off more of a bite that it can actually chew and swallow, where Legacy of the Force tries to do too much. And I think taking a step back in Fate of the Jedi and trying to do more of a concept book instead of or trying to do more of a plot concept book than like a character concept, I think makes it more steady, even if it never gets to the highs that the other two series have. So hopefully you enjoy it overall. I think Critical Thinker also said, I love 2008 Clone Wars, liking that series, and Legacy of the Force are my unpopular EU opinions. Hey, well, that's good. I'm glad you enjoy the Clone Wars, because it's kind of crazy. I made that timeline, and I always find it hilarious how many comments I get just being like, "This timeline sucks because it has the Clone Wars in it." And it's like, yeah, but it is the EU, so you can't, like, the whole point of making it is that you have nobody that I've ever seen has ever actually attempted to put the two of them together, the
Yeah.
2008 Clone Wars and the actual EU Clone Wars. So that was the point. So I'm glad you like that Clone Wars, because even though they don't actually really fit, it is still Lucas Star Wars, and I really enjoy it as Lucas Star Wars. And then on to the Ennis comment. And yeah, I agree with you. When he's done runs on superheroes, it hasn't necessarily been that good, except for Punisher. I just, in my head, I consider Punisher and Hellblazer and even The Boys in a lot of aspects superhero comics. So that's why I made that joke. But I agree with you that he's not somebody who's had an acclaimed run on a non-edgy superhero, if you want to put it that way. But yeah, back to the top here, we have Permafrost TX, who says, "Are y'all excited for / planning to read the Qui-Gon Hyperspace Stories book that just came out?" Thank you so much for that comment. I have not gotten to read it yet. I'm planning on reading it one day. Still trying to catch up, especially on the Dark Horse side of recent Marvel, recent Star Wars comics. I have not really read kind of anything outside of the High Republic and the first volume of Hyperspace Stories from the Dark Horse side of Star Wars. So I'm way behind on Hyperspace Stories in general. I know they have that new Bad Batch series out as well, where it's coming out, and then they have dropped, I believe, is Qui-Gon the first of these graphic novels
I
that
think
they've dropped?
Qui-Gon's the first, yeah.
Yeah.
Or they had, like, a Mace Windu one or something
Okay. Yeah,
recently?
because I know they
I'm not
announced a
really
bunch of
sure,
them.
yeah.
They
Yeah.
announced like 3 or 4 of them, but and Qui-Gon was supposed to come out last year, and it got delayed to this year. So I feel like I've been out of the loop with comics for a while, especially on the Dark Horse side, and so I keep forgetting what's even come out from them. But when I get a chance to, I am looking forward to reading it, and if I hear it's excellent, I will pick it up. So if you have read it, Permafrost, let us know, because if you really like it, I might actually check it out faster than if I don't really hear anybody talking about it, which has kind of been the case for most of Dark Horse's non-High Republic work, is I don't really ever hear anybody talking about it.
Yeah, and I've heard fairly decent things about it, 'cause a lot of it is about taking, like, Dooku's teachings and, like, applying it to his training of Obi-Wan, which, I mean, we've seen some pretty interesting stories told about, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's relationship, especially in canon, way more than, EU, in my opinion. But, uh, have we necessarily seen him translate, like, his own experiences as a Padawan? We've seen some very, like, shocking mixed moments, but have we, like, really dealt with that stuff? I don't know. Alright, I don't think so. So if that is really what that book kinda graphic novel's about, great. I'm excited to see that. I think that's a good, like, one-off thing to do, and I hope that the art's good. I find a lot of Dark Horse art is fairly better than, the average Marvel at times. It kinda comes in waves, obviously, but, um, I'd like to see what they do. I've some of the art that I've seen from just the Bad Batch comics that have been kinda coming out have been pretty decent too, so I'm hoping for the best here.
Well, let us know if you finally get to read it. And I think because we don't have too much in the chat left here, we have Seva's Cars and Coins. This is hello, everybody. Hello there, Seva. We're going to get to some other minor stories I do have listed. Again, this is a live Q&A. It's an Ask Us Anything. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you'd like to bring up, it doesn't have to be about Star Wars, send it into the chat, and we will get to it as soon as we can. But in the meantime, here for the next few minutes, let's get to some of these more small stories that we don't necessarily always get to talk about on a week that has a lot of big news, or a week that we get bombarded with questions. And let's start with this one. And I thought this was a fun little story to talk about. I did put it in the thumbnail. And that's that the up and coming director, Osgood Perkins, who just directed The Monkey, which didn't get that amazing reviews, but did direct what was one of the big sleeper hits. I think if The Substance wasn't a Best Picture nominee and wasn't so beloved, Longlegs last year by Osgood Perkins would have been the like surprise horror movie of the year. Now I saw it. I thought it was good. I didn't love it. I didn't think it was amazing, but Nick Cage was awesome in it, and Osgood Perkins' eye was great. He did a great job directing it, and he says he wants to make a Darth Vader movie. Well, kind of in Disney Star Wars, one of our most iconic visuals from Darth Vader is an absolute horror scene from Rogue One. This sounds like a really fun idea. I would love to see it. I'm somebody who has always been for a Darth Vader movie or show because I think the character of Darth Vader exists in so much of the timeline, and still even in canon we don't know that much of his dark times. We just have the 25 issues from Charles Soule, and then we have his appearances in Obi-Wan and Rebels and stuff. So there's still so much to discover with Darth Vader and so much you could do that if you did just want to do like a classic kind of Legends style Darth Vader's hunting people show or movie, you could make something pretty epic. And Oscar Perkins has a great eye for horror. I would love it if they went with a little edgier Darth Vader movie, but this is just an idea. It's for fun. What do you think of the idea of Oscar Perkins taking on a Darth Vader movie?
I'm supremely unqualified for this question, unfortunately, because I haven't seen, Longlegs. I saw trailers for it, and I know The Monkey just came out. And I thought it got decent reviews, but I know it's a bit more of like a horror comedy more than anything, which is definitely a lot different than Longlegs. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I really couldn't tell you. As far as just like a Vader film, I don't think the window's completely gone, but I'm of always the opinion that he should be like the boogeyman. Like, he's always lingering, he's always here and there, and then when he's finally in your face, it's like, "Oh my god," right? Like, people forget that this guy didn't become famous in 1980 because of Empire Strikes Back. He became famous in the original Star Wars because he had a great look, and he was only there for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that, and it was very iconic lines, very iconic look to him, action, everything, right? So he was just brutal from the start. Was he as sophisticated with his brutality in the first film? No, no, absolutely not. Right. But I think once he got that added in, then people started talking more and more about it, and like, oh my god, and how he looks so cool and clean. Then he started getting this a little bit of aura, right? Like, he started becoming a little bit more than just the scary supreme bad guy. It's like, oh, he's got such complexity. Oh, he's a fallen hero, all this and that. Right? And, we've already seen 3 whole films about his fall, right? So I do if you get, like, a one-off, I almost wouldn't even want it to be about just Vader, like, it'd almost be like he has to be in a crew, and who would be in a crew with him, right? Like, it's tough with the 20 years that we've been afforded with his storytelling. I don't know. I really don't see what we can absolutely do. And also found that, I didn't think Kenobi necessarily made a lot of sense. I saw a little bit of leeway there with some of the wording. I guess I'd have to dig deeper to see if there's anything to implied that he's done other things, and I'm sure we've seen it in the comics and everything, and that he's done plenty, he's led plenty, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I could take a full film. I'd love something like a special presentation on Disney Plus. You get to just flex the money, but do it for 40 minutes where it's just you get to see maybe like a day in the life of on or do something on Vader's castle, kinda bring back some of that Vader Immortal vibes. Deal with some stuff that's a little bit more unique and different about Vader than what is more traditionally what people want out of Vader because I think we've gotten a lot of that. Yeah, I think we're just undervaluing the comics or undervaluing the books and a lot of that stuff at that point, and I get it. Star Wars is a visual media, above all else, but let's care about the visual medium instead of just saying we wanted to see everything that's already been kinda done. put together. That's kind of the same thing that happened with the Solo film. We want the origin that was in the A.C. Crispin books. Here it is in a greatest hits version and like a 2-hour film. Right? That's my way there. I don't. You'd have to go for something supremely interesting, unique. It still does align with everything that has been done with every part and timeline of his character.
Well, to kind of go into that idea too of a special presentation, right? That is kind of what Perkins even says in his quote is that he wants to make a collected dreams of the memory or as told by Darth Vader in short stories. So like that would actually be kind of perfect. Like if you had an
Yeah.
anthology series. I mean, it's kind of what we did with Dark Visions in the comics, but this could be way better. Like you could take an anthology series or just say we're making 5 45-minute short films by Osgood Perkins with Darth Vader. And we're releasing one in February, one on May the 4th, one in July, and then we're gonna save the final two for Halloween. Like that would be I think that would be really cool. So I'm somebody who's always down for more live action Vader. I agree that the idea that like it is kind of hard if you're not going to include Obi-Wan or you're not going to include Luke Skywalker, or you're not going to include other characters who are
Yeah.
directly related to Vader. It's hard to find an emotional hook, especially when it's early Vader, when you're doing a little less of the like Anakin Skywalker persona. So you kind of either do some type of story that fits in with Charles Soule's version of Darth Vader, which has kind of replaced the original James Luceno version that's in Dark Lord Rise of Darth Vader, or you do something in the vein of like a Force Unleashed where you have him hunting down Jedi, you have him
Yeah.
take on an apprentice, you do something like that. Those are kind of the only ways you can do real hook around Vader is you need other characters to care about because he is the villain. But yeah, it would be interesting if they did go with Vader, and I would love it from a horror angle. So this really intrigues me. But this is, of course, just the spitballing of a creative who's kind of uh, reaching new heights right now, really ascending in the industry after Longlegs, especially because Longlegs didn't just do well critically and isn't beloved by fans, but it's also made a ton of money. So if the monkey makes a good amount of money, this guy will be kind of like the next Robert Eggers. I don't think he's made movies nearly as good as Robert Eggers, but he'll be the next Robert Eggers in terms of like studios are going to want this guy, even if he just wants to do horror. Studios are going to be looking at him because he's now made a couple lower budget movies that can actually make a lot of money. So hopefully for him, The Monkey does well. I have not gotten to see it yet, but I'm looking forward to checking it out. It was on kind of my list of most anticipated movies after seeing Longlegs. Next little story. And again, we're going to go through some more small stories here to wrap up the stream. But if you guys want to send in your thoughts on any of these stories, any of the ones we talked about, like you see in the title or the description with Andor season 2 or Kathleen Kennedy, or you have any questions that you'd like to ask us, now's your time to do so. We will be back next week on the traditional Tuesday time slot. So if it's better for you guys to join us on a Tuesday, we'll be back next week on Tuesday. You can look forward to more content continuing to come out from our channel. Actually, on that similar topic, we're just talking about Osgood Perkins. We do have a video coming out tomorrow that is ranking a lot of the most prominent directors in Hollywood right now and who is most likely to direct a Star Wars movie. That video has been out for our Patreon members and our YouTube members for some time now, and it will be out for everybody tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. Next little story. Anthony Daniels named his favorite Star Wars movie. What do you think
Yeah.
it is, Sonic? Do you think it's Attack of the Clones when he gets to say, I'm beside myself, which I actually said to him when I met him at a book signing. I was like, I didn't realize until I watched Attack of the Clones most recently that you have so many one-liners in that movie. When I was a kid, I didn't catch them. He goes, oh my God, I hated saying those. I was like, well, that's fair, but I thought they were funny. I was like George, I guess. But no, it's not Attack of the Clones. It is A New Hope. Shocker. It's the movie that kind of put him on the map. It's the movie that creates C-3PO. That's not really a surprise to me, but he said my favorite is episode 4, A New Hope, the first one. The reason is that it was a very simple story. You had Luke, who is the hero who comes from nothing and he meets people on the way, the classic journey. And then you have a bad person called Darth Vader. At that time, we don't know who he is, or we don't know that it's his daddy. And so I understood it. My favorite one to make, though, was The Rise of Skywalker, the last one. So he's covering the breadth of Star Wars. I'm not surprised because, one, A New Hope is the one that created his character, and he leads the first 20 minutes of the movie. So that's got to be a big thing for him as well. Also, kind of put him on the map. Also, Rise of Skywalker, one of the ones that gives him the most lines, the most comedic lines that aren't necessarily as one-linery goofy as Attack of the Clones. And he does get a lot of screen time and has one of the big emotional moments in the film. So, Sanak, what do you think of the Rise of Skywalker being his favorite to make and A New Hope being his favorite overall Star Wars movie?
I mean, all right, like his whole life changed. His whole life changed because of New Hope. Like, and he always talks about like how he was, visiting George Lucas. Kind of, Anthony Daniels can be a little haughty sometimes, but then he saw that image from Ralph McQuarrie, that little painting of the proto C-3PO walking the desert, and he was like, I was just so affected by it, right? And he's like, oh my god, like that's what I want to be, and he willed it. He willed it into existence. So yeah, I mean, I think he did a great job in that film, right? I mean, him and Kenny Baker have to carry that first hour essentially. So, and they do it brilliantly. Like even today, like it's slow for maybe modern audiences, but I think it's still incredible how much fun you can have out of just two different droids, right? And with very human-like droids, but worn out and weathered, and like some things that are just it was like a perfect blend of fantasy and realism there with them, those two. And Rise of Skywalker being his favorite, I mean, the film, sure, absolutely, because he's so freaking funny. All right, like, oh, my oldest friend Babu Frick after the reset and everything. The red eyes 3PO. I feel like we need more memes of that too. Like, why would his eye sockets be programmed to go red? But sure, why not? Right? Maybe he's got like different mood lightings for his eyes for like senatorial obligations that he just forgot about or something. Like there's things like that that like Star Wars is so silly about sometimes, but it just worked for me, and I liked. I really freaking liked how much he's with Oscar Isaac and Oscar Isaac. If Han is like, man, you're so annoying, but you're actually kind of helpful and useful, and I get it, right? Like, that's great. Poe Dameron hates him, absolutely hates 3PO, and I just love how he's like, I can't say anything too much because he's an OG, and then he like 3PO reminds him of that in the film, and it's like, oh, it's just funny. It's just really freaking funny. I really have a good time anytime I watch his scenes in The Rise of Skywalker because they can carry me through some of the rougher scenes for me. So
Yeah,
yeah, I absolutely am a fan. Do not get me
I,
wrong.
I
I am a huge fan.
I completely agree with that last point. Like, as rough as some of the things in The Rise of Skywalker are, there are some great moments in that middle act or like beginning to middle act in the first act with Anthony Daniels. He does have some great lines when when they fall through the sand hole and he's like, "You didn't say my name, sir, but I'm all right." That's a great line too. So yeah, I'm glad he had a good time filming that last one. I'm sure it's a little bit of recency bias too, considering that's the last Star Wars movie he got to make. But and he probably thought it was the last one he ever got to make. But I'm sure it was a good time. It seemed like they had some good chemistry. So I'm glad to hear that he enjoyed making that particular film as well. One last story to wrap up our stream tonight, and then we'll call it a night a little early. Again, if you have any last questions, thoughts, theories, anything you'd like to discuss, send it into the chat. But we'll wrap up with this, talking about Kathleen Kennedy, talking about all the upheaval around Star Wars and the Rey movie and all this stuff over the last few years. Stephen Knight finally spoke out about working on Star Wars, and he said it was a great experience. And he said, to actually quote him, I mean, it was such a great experience. And not just saying this, they were great people. Kathleen Kennedy is a pleasure to work with. Lucasfilm people are really smart and they know their craft. And for me, it's like a particular discipline in the world of writing and film. It's the world, and you enter the world, you do your bit, and you do your take. And I always knew that process and I always knew that the process then moves on. So I don't know what of the writing that I've submitted is going to end up in whatever the next incarnation of that movie is. It's just great to be there and to be a part of that. So that's a nice little quote on his way out from Stephen Knight. For those of you not familiar with Stephen Knight, he was the previous writer on the Ray movie, the really the main one after its initial inception through Damon Lindelof's script. And so Stephen Knight worked on this movie for like a year, year and a half. He was heavily involved in the process, and it is nice to hear him say all these good things about Lucasfilm and not just Kathleen Kennedy, but the people who were there. Now, anytime you hear anybody ever say anything good about anyone in Hollywood, they're all going to work together at some point. You don't hear necessarily that many people bashing someone unless they really hated their time and they're never going to do it again. But I'm glad to hear that he at least enjoyed the process. Now, to me, it is, a little more concerning. Concerns are brought up in the fact that he's like, yeah, I turned in my last script and I have no idea what they're going to do next, or if anything I really wrote is going to end up in the final project, but I had fun working on the script. That's a little concerning just for the progress of the Ray movie. I mean, it's good to know we have our next writer in George Nolfi, and like it's well underway, but it's not now. This is also kind of a little more of a confirmation that it's not necessarily a rewrite, or it wasn't necessarily creative differences like, oh, we just can't crack the story with you, Steven. We're gonna have to move on to somebody else. This is like almost like he was just hired to turn in a draft or some drafts, and they're like, okay, thank you, we're going to move in a different direction. It seems a little like, even though it's positive, it seems like a little too nonchalant for me with this Ray movie. When is this movie coming out and what are they working on now? Is this draft 3 they're working on, or are they working on a whole new take? Or you know if he's really not involved, you would think if he was involved, he might have met with George Nolfi and kind of talked about his version of the script and said, okay, this is where I was, here you go. Like, I don't know. There are some things in this that, even with it being all cheery, and I appreciate the cheery, it is still a little concerning about when we actually get the Ray movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's also interesting because he does make mention, like, I think they're gonna use a good amount of it, right? I expect it to be, right? So it's like like you said, he's not being absolutely negative or dire about it in a way that would be terribly concerning for us as Star Wars fans. But like you said, it is a little nonchalant, right? Maybe he's just playing it cool. Maybe he genuinely is happy with what he did, but he's just like, other things just kind of came up that I have to focus on right now, right? I mean, people forget, but he had the Peaky Blinders filmed this past summer, right? So I wonder if he was asked to be on set, work through some writing changes, all that, especially since the last season of Peaky Blinders, people did not love that much, right? It was okay, but it didn't really get the same reviews as the first 4 or 5, right? So yeah, I am absolutely curious to see what's gonna come out of this new Jedi Order film. I know I've theorized that, like, maybe they were thinking, "Let's just do a one-off, and then if it does well, kinda make its own trilogy," but then the Kinberg broke out, and then there's a plan for maybe a 10, 11, 12 where she's like the Obi-Wan figure, but maybe a little younger, right? Like, who knows, right? And it's like, okay, well, is this a bridge film, or is this just gonna be, like, setting up new characters that will then be bigger players and stuff like that? Like that, we don't know. I really don't know. Um, Hopefully they are trying to really feel their structure out. Maybe they do have plans. Again, another thing that always throws me off is that Daisy Ridley is extremely positive about it, and in a way that I don't think she was when she was first on board the project. Like, she was happy and excited, right? But then to kind of feel like, oh yeah, ready for my third writer, and she was just once that news broke, she was like, oh no, I already know who it is. Like, I'm super excited. I'm like, oh, okay, like I know that she's an actress, but like doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? You can't fake it on a press circuit all the time, but she has that energy, and it felt contagious in a lot of ways. So yeah, I really don't know, man. I don't know what to say other than I'm glad that he finds Lucasfilm still an incredible group of people to work with, and I'm sure they are. It's really just about execution now. It really is about making it to the next level, the next era, just like how Feige is retooling, refocusing, reintegrating Marvel Television from Netflix and properly making shows run by showrunners, and like they did with Daredevil's whole revamp for Born Again after the initial concept just wasn't working. I think even like if you don't love Captain America, it's doing fairly well at the box office for how many changes it went through, and despite it having a fairly tight reported budget, seems like they're slowly, with that success of Deadpool, with the okay success of Captain America, with what appears to be another huge success with Daredevil, right, and a revitalization of like proper TV for Marvel. I expect the same things to start happening with Disney here with the Star Wars brand fairly soon, and I think like said when we were talking about Kathleen Kennedy, a lot of the decisions that affect the Star Wars affected Marvel. It comes from the top down. If it's that similar, it's that much of a struggle in a lot of different ways, right? And I expect because Marvel has to have films every single year, has to have content every single year because it's superheroes, and that they're now able to make their changes. And now we're slowly starting to see them, and hopefully Thunderbolts and then Fantastic Four builds off of that leading into Doomsday. I expect to start seeing some of that stuff with the new Jedi Order stuff, and then with whatever comes next. And if it means Dawn of Jedi, if it means the Sean Levy film with Gosling, that's supposed to be like rumored to be 5 years after Episode 9. Like there's a bunch of stuff flying around just the same way that it was with Marvel, like just a year and a half ago. And I'm feeling confident maybe next year with Mandalorian Grogu, with Celebration here this year, we'll start to see like, oh, now we're like locking stuff in, actually aligning it, and the future plans for Kathleen's retirement and everything all start to line up and make sense. It's just right now we're just looking forward to Andor, right? And we don't know what's next.
No, those are all fair points. I think it's it's um it's probably likely that the Peaky Blinders movie is one of the reasons he was on the project so long. The more and more we find out about like his thoughts on the script, because he was on for almost 2 years, like a year and a half, a solid year and a half or more, and was actually, it seems like that was all he was working on, but he could have been working on 10 other things. And if their approach is more nonchalant to this movie than we initially thought, then it would make sense that he's a little more nonchalant about it if he only wrote one draft or two drafts, or he was there to crack ideas. It wasn't, we're all kind of under the impression that he's there to write the script that's already
Yeah.
kind of been written by
Yeah.
Damon Lindelof, and he's, changing and adjusting, and he's there for so long, and that's all he's working on. But he could have just been somebody they hire, and they're like, "Yeah, here, take some time. Whenever you have some time, write it. We'll
Yeah.
work on it, and then we'll keep going." That could have been the process until we find that out. It's kind of one of those things that the Ray movie is going to be a mystery until it actually starts production, and we'll see if it ever actually does. We'll wrap up tonight's stream here with one last comment from Critical Thinker. Thank you so much for your comment. And then again, if anybody wants to send in one last comment, send in your comment or super chat or anything, and we'll try to get to it right before we wrap up. But it will be a little shorter stream tonight, and then we'll be back again next week on Tuesday, our more traditional day for Star Wars Lad streams. And Critical Thinker says, I also read Test of Courage. This is all from the High Republic, and started reading Into the Dark. I found Test of Courage largely dull and uninteresting, but Into the Dark is the first High Republic book I'm actually really enjoying. The more insular focus is significantly preferable to Light of the Jedi, being stuffed with 70 different perspectives, whereas here you actually get to know the characters. Reith Silas is also a pretty likable protagonist. Well, thanks for your comments, Critical Thinker. We've enjoyed hearing your thoughts on High Republic as you make your way through that as well, on top of making your way through the EU, at the end of the EU at least. But yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with you on Test of Courage being dull and uninteresting. Dull, I'll give you a little more than uninteresting because I think the characters are pretty good in a Test of Courage, at least when it compares. Maybe you haven't read a lot of young adult, or not young adult, but young readers slash junior novels, chapter books in canon. But I think dull and uninteresting works for most of the books. So if you didn't like Test of Courage, I don't think you'll like any of them. Um, for any, not even just High Republic, for anything in canon. But I found the characters at least fairly strong. It is very simple. They're written for, whereas chapter books in Legends could still be read by older audiences and still work even if they're simple stories. Canon, they're all very much so aimed at the probably 8 to like 11-year-old range. They're not complex stories, and I felt like there was some complexity to the characters of Emery and Vernestra, especially in A Test of Courage. I thought it worked pretty well. The rest of the characters are kind of whatever, but I thought those two work pretty well, and the journeys they go on in A Test of Courage are actually pretty good. So I disagree on that, but I wouldn't, say A Test of Courage is one of the best High Republic books ever. It's just one of the better young books. So I still think it's one of the best overall young readers
Reader,
books
yeah, or yeah.
in High Republic. But as for Into the Dark, I'm glad you're enjoying it. Yeah, it's a completely different perspective. It's Claudia Gray, so she's one of the better writers in canon. It's much more singularly focused. Unfortunately, if you're a big fan of Wreath, we haven't been well serviced with Wreath over the course of the initiative until recently. But the newest book, Tears of the Nameless, has been excellent, and it's a great Wreath book. So you have that to look forward to. But the rest of the young adult books kind of move away from Wreath, so that's kind of unfortunate. But I hope you do enjoy Into the Dark as for what it is, I guess you could say, because it is kind of a singular story until you get a little later into the initiative.
Yeah. No, I mean, just to add to that, the young adult novels in the High Republic are a lot more hit or miss, I would say. And I say that having enjoyed all of them. I really have. But some of them are a bit of a drag. Unfortunately, Justina Ireland on her own is not great. She's a little bit better with the phase two ones, honestly, when she kind of kicks off the whole thing. It's a really great book that she does. It's with Zoraida, right? That she writes it with, I think.
No, Tessa Grattan.
No, Tessa Grattan, right? So yeah, Path of Deceit is fantastic, right? And Path of Vengeance not as good, but it's still really freaking good, right? So I can understand that that there's a little bit more appeal for what you're seeing in Into the Light, right? For sure, Aretha is a great character. He gets a lot of service in the most recent uh, young adult novel in Phase Three, and it's fantastic for him and his entire journey and everything going on from Phase Two and Phase Three and Phase One, obviously. But yeah, Test of Courage, like Liam said, I can understand if you find it a little dull at times because it's not meant for. And yeah, I'm assuming you're a little older than 6 years old, right? If not, you've got an incredible vocabulary. But yeah, it's not meant to be like that best representative of the High Republic. It's an entryway for kids to like get hooked into the series and those types of characters, that types of stories. Then as they get a little older, right, and 4 or 5 years since it started, they might have transitioned into reading more of those young adult novels as well. And then now maybe they're ready to like jump into all the adult novels and pick up on old cues that were shown in these books about the stuff that the adult novels actively participate in. Right? It is definitely a proper book strategy. It's a proper publishing, like, hey, let's get more eyes as much as possible. And it absolutely worked for phase one. Phase two was a little too short, and going back 150 years, didn't love that, even though I think it's now slowly starting to pay off here in this final third, phase three. But then the problem with phase three is it's so spread out, whereas phase one has almost feels overstuffed with all the different media, and that it had all intercuts, and sometimes you have to read other stuff. Like straight up, you have to read frankly, you just have to read the Marvel comics to get Avar Chris's story past Light of the Jedi until the parts that she has in Fallen Star. It's just a fact. But Phase 3 has kind of minimize that almost incessant need to do that, but it's spread so much at the same time, right? So yeah, I'm glad you like Into the Light. I think we're all freaking excited for what is it? Into the Dark, I believe is what it's called, right? From her.
It's
Or,
reversed. It's into
oh,
this one's Into the Dark. Into
sorry,
Light's
Into the
coming out.
Dark. Yes, yeah, yeah. It's into something, right? And she's writing both, so it's gonna be interesting to see like if there's even like parallels or like direct stuff that's in the story that's lined up and set up for us to appreciate what that story was even more so in phase one, and then get ready for that end here that's coming very quickly now for
Yeah.
phase three and the whole High Republic. So um yeah, I can see if Light of the Jedi was not your favorite. I know you brought that up, but maybe it's just not for you. And as far as like Young Jedi Knights goes, yeah, it's a lot more complex. It's more like 9 to 10 year olds. um Junior Jedi Knights is it's really the same level as a lot of the High Republic junior novels to me. So I don't know if I agree with that one specifically, but Young Jedi Knights I do.
Yeah. It's not. I think in general, Legends is written when Jude Watson took over. It's written at a lot higher
Oh yeah.
level.
Oh yeah.
Uh, Even as young reader chapter books than what these junior novels in canon have been written towards. And I think that's been something overall that's been a little disappointing, especially as Higher Republic's gone on. And maybe, it could just be the rose-colored glasses of like looking back for us as like we read A Test of Courage when it came out. We were part of the High Republic hype when it started. Um, and having as somebody who had read a lot of chapter books or junior novels in canon at that point already, I was like, wow, this is so much better than most of them because most of them are so forgettable that at least the characters I liked in this one, even if the plot was super simple. So it might just be kind of this like nostalgic kind of rose-colored glasses look back at A Test of Courage. I'm by no means thinking that book is incredible, and like I'm not gonna, even if on a reread, I don't think I would still think that, but I did remember thinking, wow, this is so much better than most of what I've read from the junior novel standpoint in canon, that I gave it a pretty high marks, especially because of the characters, and then they do continue pretty well into the future stuff. um but yeah, they're not as well written as Young Jedi Knights. Even in Young Jedi Knights is like listed as a young adult series, but it's really more of a kid series. It's more of the reading level of what Jude Watson ended up writing, and Junior Knights is written a little younger. So it is Legends was kind of all over the place, but overall story wise, it was more creative, and I think that's what made it accessible to adults, for those younger books, those chapter books. But canon, more insular stories, things that don't necessarily matter in the grander scheme. So it's a lot of simple, like exactly where the story's going to go. So it's kind of more hinged on the characters, as a lot of things are in canon. But yeah, it is disappointing. I think comparing Wreath to Zane Carrick is actually a pretty good comparison. They also have similar character design look to them as well. But that is a good comparison, and they grow in similar directions. I mean, as Zane got way more story because he was the star of a 55 issue comic series, versus Wreath has kind of struggled for story. But Wreath's step up in Tears of the Nameless recently has been big enough to actually, I think, make that a pretty good comparison, the way he's taken charge and taken his role in the story. And I can't wait to see Into the Light. We're actually like, I can't believe my sense of time's all warped from this trip I just took, but I can't believe Into the Light comes out in a month. I had to check. I knew it came out in April, but it comes out April 1st. So in less than a month, we'll be knowing what the next phase of Wreath's journey is, and that's pretty exciting. So looking forward to reading that. Yeah, critical thinker Vernestra is very different in the books than she was in the Acolyte. I personally didn't really like her at all in the Acolyte. I think she's pretty likable across all the books. She doesn't really seem the same to me at all. So we're getting that Acolyte book with her and Master Indara. So hopefully that kind of gives us a little bit of a bridge why she becomes a lot more unlikable in the Acolyte than she was originally. What happens to her that hardens her probably has something to do with Chimere, but that's going to wrap it up for our stream tonight. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed sending your questions in and hearing what our answers were, as well as all of the latest in Star Wars news. Again, like I've said 3 or 4 times tonight, we will be back on Tuesdays, our usual time, our usual day. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. Star Wars Lads will be back in full swing now. So we'll be back doing the same thing, but everything else has been the same as usual, even with me gone on the channel. So keep checking out the videos. We'll have more videos out for you guys we'll have one out every Friday. But with book reviews and stuff like that, we might have more videos out or on a slightly different schedule, but make sure you keep checking those videos out. Shorts out 3 days a week, every week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and polls twice a day, every day, voting for your favorite Star Wars character of all time. This poll has almost gone on for a year now. So we have some like crazy conclusive results, honestly, for most of it. So keep an eye out for most of that. Might start adding in some new formats as we get into March, because I always like to do kind of a March Madness spin on some of the poll stuff. So check that out. Thank you so much for watching tonight, everybody. And for 25,000 subs, we really appreciate all your guys' support in these streams and on our videos, on our shorts, on everything we do. It's been a lot of fun growing this channel, especially in the last year. But since the beginning, for the last 3 years, 4 years, we've been going on this channel. It's been a big journey, and we really appreciate all the love and support you guys have shown us and the discussions about Star Wars, because that's what drives the heart of this channel. So really appreciate all of that. Thank you so much for watching tonight's stream, everyone. Like the video, comment if you're watching on replay. Join us next week so you can send in your comments live, and subscribe so you don't miss any more from Star Wars Lads. Check out our Patreon and YouTube memberships if you want to see some more perks that involve the streams. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and we will see you all next week.